What's going on, everyone? My name is Mr. Rage22 and welcome back to my channel. Glad to have you here. So this is going to be a very interesting review. So I'm not sure if you guys could already tell, but I am basically on a short journey of Gears of War. I am basically living on this game right now. And I am basically going through the entire franchise of Gears of War. If you watched my first review of Gears of War 1, which I made earlier today, I highly recommend you watch that video if you haven't. Because, like I said, I'm basically going through an entire playthrough of the entire Gears of War series, from first to last, as much as I cannot stand Gears of War 5. That's basically foreshadowing that game's review. Gears of War 4 and 5, cannot stand those games, definitely the worst of the franchise. But I'm sure you're confused as to this game's, or this video's title. Before I say anything, please put the fucking pitchforks away, and before you make any hate comments, please just chill the fuck out and let me explain. I do not hate Gears of War 2. I just think it's kind of disappointing. Now, when I was a kid, funny enough, Gears of War 2 and 3 were my favorite ones to play. Like, when I was a kid, when I would turn on my Xbox 360, I was either popping in Gears 2 or Gears 3 over the first game. The way I played the Gears of War franchise when I was a little kid is I played the first game for the challenge and atmosphere, while I played 2 and 3 for just lots of fun and co-op with my buddies. These days, it's kind of the opposite. If you guys couldn't already tell, Gears of War 1 is one of my favorite games of all time. It's obviously not only my favorite Gears game, but like I just said, it's one of my favorite games of all time. And the reason for that is because Gears of War 1 just felt like such a unique game. It feels unique even when compared to its sequels. Gears of War 1 feels more like an actual action horror game than just your typical shooter. Gears of War 2 is literally the opposite. The reason why I see Gears of War 2 as being disappointing is because it literally does just that of the first game. It literally does the opposite of everything I loved about the first game. The first game was a dark and gritty, hardcore third-person shooter, while Gears of War 2 is more of just your typical action shooter. The atmosphere is gone, the fun, intense boss battles are gone, the more darker horror vibe is gone. Everything about Gears of War 2 just feels different in so many bad ways when compared to Gears of War 1. And to you guys, maybe that's not a problem because, you know, obviously Gears of War 2 is overrated, gets a whole lot of praise. Some people actually call this the best game in the franchise, and although I cannot see how you could think like that, you do you. You express your opinion, you live on your opinion, okay? Live by your word, live by your opinions, you do you, okay? I got no problems with you liking this game, but for me personally, I just can never think like that. To me, Gears of War 2 is basically the typical sequel bad, predecessor good. But Gears of War 2 is not even bad, though. You know, I was wrong. Gears of War 2 is not a bad game. It does things that make it feel better than the first, but then it does others that make it seem like such an inferior game compared to its predecessor. And that's why it's such a frustrating game for me to both play and review, because when I play this game, I want to enjoy it and have just as much fun with it as I did with the first game. But I can't, and when I review it, I want to talk about it just as good as I did with the first game. I want this game to be the second game I give a perfect score on my channel, but I just can't, because it does so much good while also fucking up in so many important aspects. And obviously those aspects are important, like I just said. They're important in actually making the game good, to me at least. And again, I understand that a lot of people like this game. You guys could put the fucking pitchforks away. Like, seriously, don't fucking hate on me, please. But if you want, go ahead. I mean, if you guys are angry by this review, be my guest, alright? You have to realize that my channel and my game reviews are 100% opinionated, okay? I'm not gonna review a game without my true, actual thoughts and emotions going behind it. If there is a game I like, I'm going to give it a good review, whether it's a good game or not. Because there are even some bad games that I like. If there is a game that I don't like, I'm going to give it a bad review, whether it's a game people like or not again. So without further ado, let's just get right into the meat of Gears of War 2. Starting off, like we usually do on the channel, let's start off with the gameplay. Now, Gears of War 2's gameplay honestly doesn't improve much from the first game. Now, I know what you're thinking. I'm gonna say that this is one of the first things that makes it a disappointment. Well, actually, no. Gears of War's gameplay and its combat are so good that it is still fun in the second game, even though it is literally the same as the first game. This is actually not what makes the game disappoint to me. This is actually one of the things that still makes the game good, because it still feels like classic vanilla Gears of War. The combat and the gameplay is as smooth as ever. It's as smooth as fresh butter. It actually feels a little better than the first game. The controls feel a lot more smoother. The combat and gore feels better. The gore is turned up tremendously in Gears of War 2. So the combat and gameplay, it all feels very, very good. Basically, everything I liked about the first game's combat returns perfectly fine in Gears of War 2. And like I just said, this game's combat and its gameplay is so good that even though the combat is the same as it was in the first game without getting really updated much at all, the gameplay of Gears of War is so good that even though it is literally the same in Gears of War 2, the gameplay is so good that it actually even makes the second game good. So in terms of combat, it still feels like classic good old vanilla Gears of War. It's fun, it's challenging, it's satisfying. Just like the first game, every time you get a kill in this game, it's going to feel good. Especially when you use something like the sniper, the bolt-hawk, or the shotgun. But even if you're just popping and shooting, just like in the first game with the Lancer or the Hammer Burst, the kills are always going to be satisfying in the Gears of War games. Well, except for Gears of War 5. That game is gay as fuck. But anyways, one actual improvement of Gears of War 2's combat is actually the number of enemies that you are facing. In Gears of War 1, you were facing a good amount of enemies, but holy shit, in Gears of War 2, you are literally facing hordes of enemies. There are moments in this game where you are fighting almost, it looks like 20 or so enemies all on screen, and it makes the combat so much more intense and satisfying when you are actually pulling off your shots and actually getting kills at a rapid rate with your quick active reload. Popping and shooting is one of the greatest gameplay feats about Gears of War, because it gives you that sense that you truly are a badass, but it also has moments of vulnerability when you are getting overwhelmed, and you are going to get overwhelmed in Gears of War 2 just like you were in the first game. Another great thing about Gears of War 2's combat is the enemies. Gears of War 2 also brings in a lot of new enemies, and this is so welcomed. This is actually one of the things that actually does improve upon the first game, and that's the thing about a good sequel. A sequel is supposed to take everything about how great the first game was and improve upon it in 10 different ways better, by adding new variety and making the gameplay and everything from the first game better in the second, by adding so much new variety. And Gears of War 2 definitely has that with both its weapons and its enemy types. Gears of War 2 brings in lots of new enemies, some good, some bad, mostly good, only a couple of bad. I think only the one enemy in Gears of War 2 that's annoying is honestly the Tickers, which are basically this enemy that basically just like explodes, and they're basically the typical Allah Akbar Arabic guys who would basically just like, you know, just basically the suicide bombers. They're basically the fucking suicide bombers of the Gears of War series. Annoying as fuck, especially while playing on the harder difficulties, but the other enemies are great. They really spice up the combat and make the combat so much more satisfying, because having more things to shoot and kill in a Gears of War game is obviously going to be welcomed and is obviously going to make the game better for it. So the game's enemy variety is fucking beautiful. It's great. So yeah, enemy variety and the combat, those are two things that are good about Gears of War 2. And like I said earlier, The fact that Gears of War's gameplay is so good that it manages to make the second game good, even without being improved upon, prove just how good Gears of War's gameplay actually is, because the gameplay of Gears of War is so good that it didn't even need to be improved much in the second game. It's still good, and it's actually enough on its own to make the second game good, even though it's the same gameplay from the first game. And when you compare that with the new enemies and the new weapons we get, it makes it so much better. Speaking of new weapons, we basically get a couple of new weapons in Gears of War 2. We get the Scorcher, which is basically the equivalent of a flamethrower, real fun to use. We get the Mortar, which is basically, it's pretty self-explanatory. And we also get a rapid fire pistol. That's pretty much it in terms of the new weapons. Pretty much everything from Gears of War 1 is still here, with just a couple of new ones. One thing that's actually bad about Gears 2 is, for whatever ungodly reason, the developers decided to nerf the Hammer Burst. Remember when it was a rapid-fire weapon in Gears of War 1? Well, now it is basically a semi-automatic gun in Gears of War 2, which is basically where you it's basically where you have to tap the trigger multiple times to get it to shoot. So, yeah, they basically messed up the Hammer Burst real bad in Gears of War 2. Also, one small gripe about the game I don't like is the fact that the ammo is downgraded for some reason. I found myself running out of ammo way more in Gears of War 2 than I did in Gears of War 1. That's because they basically nerfed how much ammo you can carry. And for whatever stupid reason, they actually do this in every Gears of War game. In Gears of War 1, you can have 660 rounds. In Gears 2, it's 550. And then in Gears 3 and Judgment, it's 420. I don't know why they keep nerfing it. I haven't played Gears 4 yet, not that much or anyways, but I'm pretty sure it's also nerfed in that game. Alright guys, so that's pretty much my only positives for Gears of War 2. Now we jump into why I found Gears of War 2 to be a disappointing game. The first problem with Gears of War 2 are its segments. And this, like, the reason this pisses me off so much is because Gears of War 2 fails in what Gears of War 1 succeeded in. Because Gears of War 1's segments were incredible. Not only did each different segment of Gears of War 1 either bring in a new enemy type or a new place to explore, which had its own vibe and atmosphere, or in a new boss fight, which was also really fun. And we'll get to the boss fights in a minute. Gears of War 2's segments just really don't feel very good. They feel more frustrating than actually good. One of Gears of War 2's first main segments is basically this part where you get eaten by this giant ass rockworm and you are now trapped inside of it, and now you basically have to cut your way out of it. Now on paper this sounds like it could be a really fun segment, but instead it ends up being incredibly frustrating. I found myself dying so much on this segment, and I think a lot of other people could agree, because you're basically in a QuickTime event, in a constant QuickTime event, where you are basically getting squished by these like these giant teeth or something, and it's so frustrating. This entire segment is basically trial and error until you could get it right, and even when you do get it right, the game will sometimes decide to cuck you. It is so incredibly annoying. When you compare the segments of Gears of War 2 to the segments in Gears of War 1, they fall flat on their faces so incredibly hard. For example, one of the first cooler segments of Gears of War 1 is when you face the Berserker. It's extremely terrifying, and it adds back to my point about how each segment in Gears of War 1 brought something new to the table of the game. Whether it was just some atmospheric exploration, a new boss battle, or a new enemy type, Gears of War 2 offers none of that. Yes, it has segments, but unlike Gears of War 1, which actually managed to make its segments good and feel fun to play, which made those segments good, Gears of War 2's segments honestly feel more annoying and trial and error-like. Because like I said, Gears of War 2's first actual main segment is extremely infuriating. It's more trial and error than actual fun and challenging gameplay. Like literally, everything in this segment is like a trap. You have to worry about giant teeth squashing you, or you have to worry about getting showered in acid. It's so incredibly stupid. It's not challenging, it's not fun, it's irritating. And I can say that for just about all of Gears of War 2 segments, and honestly, this is what makes the game so incredibly infuriating for me, because it's so bad when you compare it to Gears of War 1 segments, because Gears of War 1 segments were a combination of fun and challenge. Again, using the Berserker level as an example, the Berserker segment from Gears of War 1 was fun, challenging, and terrifying, because it gave you the sense that you are facing off against an indestructible monster that could kill you within seconds, and all you could do is run, hide, or die, which honestly made Gears of War 1 feel like an actual survival horror game at times, which actually changed the combat pace. And that's what made Gears of War 1 segments so good. Not only were those segments fun, but it actually made the game feel different from what it was. It changed up the gameplay and spiced up the gameplay, unlike Gears of War 2, which just brings in more frustration and irritation. The second segment of Gears of War 2 is actually the best. The second segment of Gears of War 2 feels a lot like the fourth chapter of Gears of War 1. You're basically exploring a creepy facility at night. And this is actually where Gears of War 2 kind of turns into a horror game itself, because in this facility, unlike the first game where you were just fighting wretches, which already made that dark, creepy facility creepy, in Gears of War 2, this facility is literally the most terrifying part of the game, because like the first game, and I wish the rest of the game was like this, we get a new fun segment which brings in new enemies, because in this segment you face these horrifying humanoid monsters which are basically different versions of the Locust, but they feel more like the enemies from Dead Space, because these new enemies cannot die by just shooting them, they have to be dismembered. That's what made the first Gears of War so good. New segments with either new enemies or a new fun place to explore with a great atmosphere. And this is what made Gears of War 2 feel like Gears of War 1 all over again. And for a moment, it was Gears of War 1 all over again. The creepy facility that you explore in this segment is identical to the one in Gears of War 1. It's just not as dark and gloomy, but it's still creepy. And of course, you get this new enemy type. It's great. I wish the rest of the game was like that. Not only that, but in the later part of the segment, you basically have to escape from Razor Hail. This may sound annoying to some, but it was honestly great. It was intense and it was fun, and that's just like how Gears of War 1 segments were. They were fun but challenging at the same time, either by bringing in new enemy types or by just stacking lots of crazy odds against the player. And this was a fantastic segment of Gears of War 2. And unfortunately the last, because the segment after this is arguably the worst part of the entire fucking game. It's basically an 11-minute long vehicle segment, and this vehicle that you drive in this segment breaks so fucking easily. This thing will literally explode after being shot only a couple of times. Again, just like the Rockworm segment, it is so incredibly irritating. Instead of actually being fun and challenging, it's irritating and fucking annoying. Because the vehicle you drive is not only extremely clunky to control, but it breaks down so easily. This thing will explode as if it has like 10 sticky bombs from GTA 5 attached to it. And GTA 5 is overrated as fuck as well. Funny I mentioned that game. And not only that, but in this segment, you are driving on ice for a minute, and the Locusts are basically destroying that ice under you. And since the vehicle controls are so incredibly, they're so fucking annoying, and just so weird, I mean, seriously, I've never seen such bad driving controls in a game. Like, honestly, the reason why this segment's controls are so clunky is because the vehicle controls are terrible. So when you compare that to the fact that you're basically driving on ice and Locusts are trying to break it under you, this makes this segment all the more annoying. So Gears of War 2 segments, they fucking suck. They absolutely suck. Honestly, the only other good segment in Gears of War 2 is when you go underground. There's 2 segments where you are underground in this game, and that's kind of the premise of the game, because you're basically attacking the Locusts in their own home, which is like, you know, underground, the planet of Sarah. So there's 2 segments, 2 long segments, where you are underground, and the only good thing about these parts of the game is it's just classic Gears of War combat. There's no annoying boss battles that are actually bad. There's no annoying segments that have irritating parts. It's just classic Gears of War combat. So those 2 segments where you are underground, those are honestly the only fun parts of the game. Other than that, everything else is not really good. The second other bad part about Gears of War 2 are its boss battles. Again, just like the first game, the boss battles fall flat on their face compared to the boss battles in Gears of War 1. The first boss battle of Gears of War 2 is like this giant leviathan, and the only way to kill it is to cluck a grenade in its mouth, but your chances of missing it are so incredibly high. Again, this is just annoying and frustrating. If my friend wasn't playing the game with me, I probably would have done this part of the game 10 times, because the chances of you actually getting your grenade inside of its mouth are extremely high of actually you not getting it, because in order to get it in its mouth, its tongue or something is like moving extremely quickly. So how am I supposed to pluck my grenade in its mouth when the part of its mouth that I have to get it in is moving at 1,000 miles per hour? That's an exaggeration, but still, this is just not a fun boss battle. It's too irritating and too easy, because once you actually know how to pluck your grenades in its mouth, it literally dies after you doing that 3 times. It's not a fun boss battle. It's not intense. It's just annoying and infuriating. If it's not too easy, it's too hard if you can't pluck your grenades in its mouth. The second boss battle of the game is even worse. Remember the General Rom boss battle from Gears of War 1, which was extremely hard and grueling on higher difficulties? Yeah, Gears of War 2's version of that boss battle is against some basically Rom wannabe, against this enemy called Scourge, and I shit you not, the entire boss battle is literally just a chainsaw duel. This guy literally is just dropping rocks on you. You dodge the rocks, he charges at you, you do the little grenade, the chainsaw duel, and that's it. The boss battle ends after you do that like 5 times, and that's it. This boss battle ends in what is arguably the last good segment of the game, which is this part where you basically drive one of the new enemy types, which is a Reaver. I forgot to mention that. This enemy was pretty cool in the game, by the way. The Reavers were a very cool addition to the enemies, and in this later segment of the game, you get to drive one, and it leads to an extremely intense chase. This was arguably one of the more funner segments of the game. Like, this segment was actually just really good campy fun. And this is how the boss battle with Scourge ends, because it's basically a chase and shoot section, but it's a fun chase and shoot section because it actually requires strategy and skill to your aiming. And this part of Gears of War 2, unlike its previous segments, actually challenges your skill instead of your patience, because it's not annoying, it's fun and challenging and intense, just like how Gears of War, classic vanilla Gears of War, is supposed to be. So that segment, it was pretty damn cool. A lot of Gears of War segments are actually action focused. The bad segments that I mentioned are thankfully not that long, but they're still disappointing, because when you compare them to Gears of War 1, one of the things that made Gears of War 1 is the fact that it was almost a perfect game. Hell, you know what? It was a perfect game, because its gameplay was amazing. Its segments were great because they were fun, challenging, and made the game feel different by making the gameplay different, either by making it feel more survival horror focused or just more intense. And the boss battles as well. The boss battles in Gears of War 1 were amazing. The Corpser boss battle was fantastic. The Corpser boss battle gave you a feeling that you were fighting something extremely grotesque and nearly unstoppable, just like the Berserker. But when you defeat it, it feels satisfying. And the Brumak boss battle was even better, because that one gave you a sense that you were fighting something that actually should have killed you, because the Brumak boss battle in Gears of War 1 was extremely hard. But more fair, which made you still feel having fun, you know? Gears of War 2 is a lot more action focused. Gears of War 2's only actual good is honestly its combat. Unlike Gears of War 1, which was good in all aspects, from its great combat and gameplay to its fun segments to its boss battles, Gears of War 2 is a mixed bag. Because its segments, they fucking suck. There are only 2 good segments of Gears of War 2, and like I said, it's the segment where you were inside the creepy facility with the new enemy types and the razor rain, and the segment where you're driving a Reaver. Those are honestly the good segments of the game, and the thing that's so bad is segments is what spiced up the gameplay in Gears of War 1, so the fact that they're bad here in Gears of War 2 is what makes the game disappointing for me. So Gears of War 2, it's a good game, you know, it's good because, you know, at least it still has this combat to fall back on, but the fact that its segments and its boss battles are so bad, it's what makes the game so incredibly frustrating. And the last boss battle of the game, like the 2 previous boss battles, which were just way too easy, the last boss battle of the game is so lackluster, just like the game's segments, which are annoying, and the game's boss battles, which I just said are lackluster. The last boss battle of the game is also so cool. Spoilers, but it's literally a Lambent Brumac. There was so much variety here. They could have made it one of the most intense and downright terrifying boss battles in the game, because the Brumac, the Lambent Brumac looks terrifying. It looks so terrifying and so intimidating, so grotesque. But the fact that the boss battle is so easy makes this boss battle so bad. You're literally just using the Hammer of Dawn, and that's it. It dies in like 3 hits. I'm not sure if it lasts longer on the harder difficulties, but even if it did, it wouldn't stop it from feeling generic, because you're literally only using one tactic against it. Unlike in the previous Gears game, where there was lots of tactics to use in both its segments and its boss battles. One other fun segment I forgot to mention is a part where you get to drive a Brumac. That very same Brumac becomes the boss battle I just mentioned. That was another extremely fun segment because it was basically just chaos. You are basically just raining down pure fire and hell on the Locust. That was an extremely fun segment, and this is not even arguable. This was the best part of Gears of War 2, and one of the most memorable. Besides the one where you're basically on Dizzy's, basically these giant vehicles. That's another segment I forgot to mention, which was it was a decent segment. You know, the first parts of Gears of War 2 are good. The game starts off good enough, but as it goes on, it just starts to become a lot more tedious and really annoying and infuriating. So that pretty much covers Gears of War 2's gameplay, and this is what makes Gears of War 2 disappointing to me, because like I said in my previous review, the best part about a game is its gameplay, and the gameplay is the most important aspect of a game. It's the aspect that a game needs to accomplish over everything else. And Gears of War 2, it kind of gets it right. The combat is good enough, but the fact that the segments are so annoying, you know, maybe if you look at Gears of War 2 without comparing it to Gears of War 1, maybe it's better, I don't know. I mean, the reason why Gears of War 2 is disappointing to me is because I think it just falls flat compared to Gears of War 1. Because Gears of War 1 was a perfect game. It succeeds in nearly every aspect that it has, from its gameplay to its segments, because the segments of Gears of War 1 were so great. They introduced new enemies, they introduced new fun atmospheric environments, and new odds stacked against the player, which were fun, while Gears of War 2 segments offer annoying odds against the player, which are not fun. And that's what's arguably so bad about Gears of War 2. One thing I forgot to mention with the game's combat, now that I think about it, is you now get executions. Basically, when you shoot down a Locust, if you damage it enough, you could basically perform an execution on it, either a grub stomp or like this beatdown move, or you could use it as a meat shield. Pretty basic stuff, you know, pretty good. Gears of War 2 is what brought in the executions. One other good thing about Gears of War 2 is the Horde Mode. The Horde Mode in Gears of War 2 is, it's alright, you know, it's a bit rich, but it's alright. you know, it's pretty decent. It's pretty generic as well, but you know, it's your decent Horde mode. The multiplayer was also hugely improved upon, but Gears of War 2's multiplayer is fucking dead. The multiplayer in Gears of War 2 is almost as dead as the franchise itself, so don't play multiplayer. So yeah, Horde mode is good. You know, it's your typical Horde mode. It's alright. Basically just fighting wave after wave with the Locust Horde. It's good, but I do recommend bringing a friend along with it. You're also gonna get your ass kicked. Another disappointing thing about Gears of War 2 is the atmosphere. The atmosphere from Gears of War 1 is completely gone in Gears of War 2. Gears of War 1 felt like a dark and depressing, almost survival horror-like game with its dark, grueling atmosphere. Gears of War 2 just doesn't feel that same way. It feels more generic. And the story, it's okay. It's your typical story, you know. It's all right. It's your typical continuation of the first game story. It basically continues the story of the first game. It's all right. It's all right. So yeah, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think about Gears of War 2. This is not a bad game, but it's certainly not a great one either. Gears of War 2 it's all right. You know, it's an all right game. Definitely the most frustrating for me, but it's all right. You know, it's a game that I could enjoy after playing the first game. You know, after I played the first game and played this one, I could enjoy it a little bit. You know, it's not too shabby. So yeah, guys. Decent story, not too good atmosphere, not too good gameplay, but it's still alright. But let me know, what do you think about Gears of War 2? I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please let me know what you think about Gears of War 2 in the comment section below. And yeah, shout out to my best friend TTV Daddy Death, because he helped me complete this whole game. If it wasn't for him, it would have been a lot more difficult. So shout out to him. And yeah, anyways, thank you guys so very much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed. Gears of War 2, it gets a 6 out of 10 for me. Decent game, decent story, decent gameplay. Yeah. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you guys in the next review. And trust me, next review will be another positive one, because Gears of War 3 is coming, baby. Can't wait. So anyways, yeah, I will see you guys in the next video. This is Mr. Rage 22 signing off. Bye-bye, guys, and have a good one.